And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Today's ice edge here showing sea ice around most of St. Lawrence Island and northeast and south of Nunivak Island, with just about none to the east there, then extending on down in toward Bristol Bay. And this will continue to advance southwestward here, especially north of Nunivak Island, and to a lesser extent south of the island there over the next few days. Otherwise, tonight's weather, low pressure moves up just south of the Kenai Peninsula. Periods of snow, southern Alaska, lighter amounts here up to the north there toward the Brooks Range. And low pressure covering a good portion of the southwestern Bering Sea there. Snow showers, increasing winds for Adak and Atka. Periods of rain and snow for the eastern Aleutians. Back to snow and rain showers for the Alaska Peninsula and up to Kodiak Island. And the front brings rain into the Panhandle. This system to the south here tracks northeastward tomorrow as the other system troughs out and just dies over the south central Alaska area for continued periods of snow tapering off in the afternoon. And another low pressure area drops down toward the Alaska Peninsula. Colder air coming southward here, bringing snowfall levels down to sea level to the eastern Aleutians, definitely for the Pribilofs. Areas of snow over much of the interior, except for the Arctic coast and North Slope. And then for Thursday, areas of light snow or snow showers here in the blue shaded areas of the interior. Low pressure in the Gulf of Alaska weakens. That'll keep it unsettled and damp for the North Gulf Coast into the Panhandle. More rain with this spreading up toward the southern southeast coast in the afternoon with that warm front. Increasing wind, rain, and snow across the Aleutians with that system. Coastal water forecast here for the Panhandle and the south coast. South winds at 20 knots. Central coast, south to southwest winds, 20 knots, and south to southwest 20 knots for the north coast. Lynn Canal, southeast winds 25, gusting 40 knots, southeast 25 for Stevens Passage, south winds at 20 for Clarence Strait. And then for the inside waters on Thursday, all directions are out of the southeast, 15 knots for Clarence Strait, 20 knots for Stevens Passage, and 25 knots for Lynn Canal. South coast, south winds 15 to 25 knots, and the central coast, south at 30 knots. Same thing for the north coast, south winds 30 knots. Prince William Sound tomorrow, west winds at 20 knots. And for the eastern North Gulf Coast, southwest winds 25 to 30 knots, west 20 here south of Resurrection Bay. Light variable winds at 10 knots for a change here for the Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay. Cook Inlet, variable to north winds, 10 to 15 knots. And for Thursday, Cook Inlet, variable winds, 10 knots. Northwest winds, 30 knots for the Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay. West at 20 here for the western North Gulf Coast. Variable 10 to 15 knot winds for the eastern North Gulf Coast. And Prince William Sound, a light north breeze at 10 knots, seas no more than 2 feet. And for Kodiak Island, variable to east winds 10 to 15 knots for the day on Wednesday. Southeast wind at 10 knots for the Bristol Bay area, and south to west winds 20 knots for the Alaska Peninsula. And for Thursday, Alaska Peninsula, northwest winds blowing across there at 20 to 25 knots, west at 20 for Bristol Bay, and Kodiak Island picking up the winds a little bit there, west-northwest at 20 to 25 knots. Gales out for the eastern Aleutians tomorrow, west winds 35 to 40 knots with 12 to 29 foot seas. Central Aleutians, gale warnings also 40 to 45 knot winds with 15 to 20 foot seas, and 30 to 40 knot winds from Chitka Island from the northwest, and southwest to northwest winds, Kiska to Shemya at 25 knots. And then for Thursday, Kiska to Shemya, north to northeast winds 25 to 35 knots. East winds 40 to 45 knots here for the central Aleutians, and southeast at 40 knots here coming in toward Nikolsky, and for Unalaska Island, south to east winds at 25 to 30 knots. For the southwest coast on Wednesday, looking at northeast there for the Yukon Delta coast, and east for the Kuskokwim Delta coast at about 10 to 15 knots. North at 15 knots for St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound. St. Matthew Island, north winds 25 knots. Pribilofs a little stronger, north winds at 30 knots with 10-foot seas. Those become light and variable on Thursday there, down to 10 knots, with seas subsiding to 7 feet, north 15, St. Matthew Island. Southwest coast, northwesterlies 15 to 20 knots. And for Norton Sound, north at 10, 15 knots out of the north for St. Lawrence Island. For the Arctic coast tomorrow, east winds at 10 knots, and for the Chukchi Sea, north winds 15 to 20 knots. And then for Wednesday, Chukchi Sea, north to northwest winds at 15 knots. For the western Arctic coast, west winds at 10 knots. Light winds out of the west for the central coast, and 10-knot west winds for the eastern Beaufort Sea coastline.